Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest psych health and safety community event ever. The inaugural The Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024 and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burrows, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zagi Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses, and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How today, Joelle?
You've got like a smirk on your face and it's making me very suspicious.
No, it's just often when I'm reading the intro out for the show, I feel like you're watching me and smiling, and it just makes me like want to laugh. And so I have to kind of just hold my stuff together.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at you because you're talking.
Yeah, I know.
That's all.
It's polite.
There's no judgment.
No, I just feel this intense judgment coming from across the desk, and
I mean, there's just my baseline.
Yeah, which is intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll grant you that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if people ever watch the video back on YouTube, often you'll see I'm smirking because I'm just trying to not laugh at the fact that Joelle's watching me intensely as I read word for word the intro. Yeah, but you're doing well? Yeah.
Yeah, went to the beach yesterday.
You're not sunburnt?
No, I put zinc on.
Yeah, okay.
We went to the sculptures by the sea at Cottesloe.
Yeah, nice. How was it?
It was fine.
That's probably most people's perception of sculptures by the sea.
Yeah. Ronan wanted his photo taken with lots of them, so that was fine, and he had a good time going for a swim as well and got some ice cream. So, yeah, it's a nice afternoon out.
And you avoided third-degree sunburn?
I wore lots of clothes and a big floppy hat, and then I put zinc on the bits of skin that were still exposed to the sun.
Not your first rodeo?
No,
Clearly not.
I've had many decades of dealing with the Australian sun.
Yeah, being a ginger in WA. Yeah,
I'm not actually ginger, listeners. I'm blonde. I just have skin that's susceptible to
strawberry
sunburn.
Blonde?
No.
Okay.
It's more like a sort of ash blonde now, but when I was little, it was white blonde.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
my brother's a bit of a ginger though, so it's definitely I've got the genetics in there somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'm colourblind, so yeah.
Actually, my uncle's a proper ginger.
There you go. It's definitely strong in your family. Yeah, and your skin.
Yes.
Yeah, lack of melanin. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, look. Skin care regimes aside, we should probably introduce our guest.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So this is a returning guest.
It is.
He is an organisational psychologist with more than 2 decades of experience. He has worked with startups in Silicon Valley and New York Stock Exchange and ASX 100 companies. He is the managing director of Infinite Potential. Joining us for his second appearance, a warm welcome, John Chen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me back.
Mate, Yeah, you're actually in a esteemed company. There is not too many people who've made 2 appearances. We usually leave such a poor impression on our guests who come on. It's very hard for us to attract them back a second time. But John, thank you for succumbing to pressure and being willing to come and talk about your latest research.
No problem. This is a fantastic podcast I listen to all the time, so I feel like I would love to, really enjoy coming back.
Oh, with compliments like that,
Wonderful.
You can come back anytime, John.
I actually, as I was pulling together the agenda for this, I listened back to the previous one, and we were talking about the dead midgies on my desk, which was just delightful.
Yeah, we haven't had that problem for a while.
We haven't, fortunately.
Yeah.
They've all been dying near Jack's desk because that's where that pot plant is, where they hatch out of.
Yeah.
But let's not go down that
that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So John, what podcasts are you listening to lately?
Right now, I am listening to Pod Save America. I'm a bit of a political junkie, especially growing up in the U.S. American politics. It's like something you can't turn away. You just have to watch this thing happen. So, and Pod Save America, it's quite a good podcast on everything that's going on and all of the things that's coming up in the November election.
One might describe it as being akin to watching a train crash, right?
Yes, I was trying to avoid that, but yes, you are 100% correct. And I was thinking, like in the last episode, they were talking about some of the policies that might get enacted if Trump gets elected. For example, one of them is increasing the age for retirement or collecting Social Security. And like those type of policies, when it comes to like thinking about psych safety and hazards, that would be a pretty major root cause of creating that stress for people.
Yeah, and they've been doing that in the UK as well, I think. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely. A strong connection there between kind of federal policy and then what that means for people who are in work and their health outcomes for sure. So I guess for listeners who maybe didn't hear your last episode or might have forgotten, can you tell us a bit about your professional background, please?
Yeah, sure. So organizational psychologist, as Jason mentioned, I started my career in psychometric assessments. So doing a lot of designing and developing of different kinds of testing, everything from sort of that pre-employment screening test to leadership kind of potential assessments. And then from there, my career kind of focused primarily in the talent management space, or more specifically in that leadership identification and development. And so I've been lucky enough to, in my kind of professional life, to really been able to kind of work with some really amazing leaders and also amazing kind of future leaders, like those kind of leaders that really inspire you, the ones that you learn a lot from and the ones that you just know you're going to follow them because they're going to make a huge impact wherever they go, right? And I knew that I wanted to have a career where I can help identify who those people are for organizations and help those individuals really develop and most importantly, be seen. And, because I'm quite passionate about increasing leaders, the leadership population from those underrepresented groups within the workplace. So kind of spent a lot of time in various talent roles trying to combine and to really elevate those who are in that population. And towards the end of last year, I decided to kind of leave the corporate life and work full time at Infinite Potential. And we are a non-for-profit think tank and consultancy that I started a few years back to just be able to kind of conduct research on kind of workplace matters. So focusing on that full time now.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So, John, it's been a little over a year since you last joined us to talk about the state of workplace burnout in 2023. For listeners who may have missed that episode, can you tell us a bit about your ongoing burnout research?
Yeah, sure. So there's two main reasons why I started doing this work on burnout. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, my career was really focused on kind of developing future leaders. And where I really kind of got to is, you know, after working in this space for quite a while, I started seeing this kind of pattern where I saw really high potential individuals leave organizations, and not just to leave for another organization, but like just leave completely. And these are people who were doing great. They were, really moving within the organizations, and everybody thought really highly of them. But then they just kind of leave, and also, they really love what they did. I know, having worked with a lot of them for several years, I knew, they had really high ambitions for where they wanted to go. But something happens, and the next thing you know, they're gone. Sometimes, like, not just from the organization, but from the field as well. And I didn't have a word for it back then, but kind of reflecting back, I think we were losing all these great leaders to burnout. And I knew that the decision that these individuals hadn't made to give us something that they worked really hard for and that they really wanted wasn't easy, but it was something that they had to do for their own kind of well-being and survival. And I felt really bad for them individually, but also in my role as looking after talent and succession management, I knew this was a really big hit for organizations too, that they kept losing a lot of these really great leaders that they had invested a lot into as well. So, what I came to understand after working in different industries, in different countries, things like that, that it wasn't about finding, quote unquote, like a more resilient person, as I think some might think, that it was the demands and sort of the way that these roles were designed were really unsustainable, and it just burned people out. So I thought, if I wanted to be really successful in my role, in the leadership space, I needed to first solve this issue of burnout. And so that's one reason. The other reason is much more opportunistic. When COVID started, there was this big change in how we work. Remote work became the thing, even for organizations that thought they would never do that. And so the nerdy scientist in me thought, hey, the world's ending, but there's a good opportunity to do some research here. And that's where this burnout research kind of started. So we started measuring how this shift affected things like burnout, engagement, and other organizational metrics.
Yeah, there's definitely a big focus on burnout in light of the pandemic, and maybe obviously there was a lot of pressures outside of work as well, with the uncertainty around the health implications of the virus, and the job insecurity with mass layoffs, and economic security, all the rest. So really interesting times. How much I'm interested, and it's probably a bit opportunistic of me as well, John, to drop in this, but at our conference coming up in June, one of the key topics is going to be burnout, and we've got two of the preeminent researchers in burnout, Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter, who are going to be presenting at the conference. So to what degree have people like that influenced your own kind of understanding of burnout and your own research?
Oh, massively. I mean, they, like you mentioned, they are sort of the founding researchers, the people to go to when it comes to burnout. The mass burnout inventories, are still one of the best inventories to use out there when it comes to measuring burnout. There's countless articles and research that's used that for to kind of measure burnout. And all of the work that they have been doing to kind of move this conversation forward has been really great. And I think besides them, I think they were probably one of the first to really just talk about the core or the root causes for burnout as being about the organizational structures and cultures rather than the individual. And I think the research on burnout that started in the 50s within the health profession, but even back then for quite a long time was really about fixing the individuals. Like they treat it as almost like a sickness. There's something wrong with this person. Let's see what we can do to fix it, like other illnesses. But it wasn't until really when Maslach and later came around to really shift that conversation so that we are focusing on these root causes on within the organization that we can change to alleviate burnout.
Yeah, and it's such an important distinction, right? And it was really refreshing to hear on our podcast a few episodes ago from this one. It would have been maybe a month or two beforehand with Joe Grasso, who is working at a digital EAP out of the US. And he was getting a lot of requests by their clients to do things around burnout. And their clients had kind of wanted like training interventions or resilience building interventions. But when his team and him looked into the root causes of burnout, then they realized, like you're saying, it's actually more to do with the systems of work and the structures of work rather than an individual not being resilient enough. So it's really great, like with the research that you're doing, and then people like Maslach and Leiter as well. It's really fantastic that now when psychologists and other people who are drawing on an evidence base for how to intervene in certain health-related matters like burnout, they're directed the right way, right? They're directed back to the root cause, which is work design, rather than just making people more resilient, which is really cool.
So you spoke with us last year about the 2023 report. Are there any significant differences in the findings of this year's report?
Yeah, definitely. Each year we try to do some of the same things to gather that longitudinal data, and we also try to add in some new questions and test out new ideas as it relates to burnout. And so this year, one of the things that we saw was, in the past 3 years, we saw a steady increase of around 4% year over year in terms of global levels of burnout. But interestingly, this year, we saw a leveling off in the rate of burnout. So the data shows that about 38% of the respondents globally were experiencing burnout, which is the same as last year. Now, when we dig a little deeper into that data, we saw a slight disturbing trend that the rate of burnout is increasing for women while it's decreasing for men. And along those same lines, women are reporting lower levels of well-being and feelings of organizational support, while men are reporting higher levels of well-being and organizational support. So in the past years, it was generally men and women showed sort of a decrease in those things together in terms of well-being, organizational support. But for whatever reason, in this past year, and this might be the reason why it's sort of leveling off, women are doing it a lot tougher than men when it comes to burnout. And another interesting finding that we found this year, and that was about what we're calling the manager-employee perception gap. And so, as we work with organizations on burnout, we talk to a lot of managers, employees about a range of things. And we often hear really different stories about the different levels of how stressful their workplace was and what was the cause of those kind of burnout. And we got interested in saying, is there an actual perception change in how well people think each other is doing? And so we tested it in this year's study. And what we found was that 68% of people managers indicated that their employees' overall well-being was they're about the same or better, or have gotten better in the past 12 months. But 45% of those individuals said that their well-being had worsened in the past 12 months. So there's a bit of a perception gap here. Now, it's just to be clear, we're limited in our study in not being able to compare direct reporting lines. So we would have to work with organizations to be able to do that. But this data does suggest that organizations need to be aware that there could be perception gaps when it comes to reportings about well-being, and that the results they're using in some of these traditional survey methods might not be telling the whole story. So just doing, let's say, an average of everyone, or just looking at employees at certain levels, that might not be telling the whole story, and they need to be a little bit more careful about how they interpret that information.
Yeah, that's an interesting finding, John, and probably speaks to why we need to do really sort of good quality consultation with a broader group of the workforce than we might generally target, especially when we are thinking about these things that really, I guess the role of individual factors do play a significant role there as well in people's experience of work. And so that sort of typical approach of just like consulting with the leaders and with the sort of workforce representatives might not be enough to really get a good understanding of actually what are the levels of distress in the workforce.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, is that it, Joelle? That was your insight.
That was my insight. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, but it's something that we've talked about, I guess, a fair bit on this podcast, John. In that your traditional kind of top-down risk assessments probably don't cut it when it comes to psychosocial, because a lot of it is, the individual's experience. And when you're talking about, the main cause of burnout being a mismatch between the individual and their work, it's hard to get that secondhand. It's better to go directly to the source.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we are sophisticated enough with our technology, with methodologies, that we can accommodate for those type of things. We just need to plan it ahead of time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So are you seeing any evidence of specific psychosocial hazards being linked to burnout?
Yeah, this is a question that we get quite a lot. I don't have to tell you or your audience, this conversation about psychosocial hazards recently. And so in this year's study, we wanted to have a look at psychosocial hazards and the link to burnout. As you know, the list of psychosocial risks and hazards is pretty long. And while they're all quite important, we want to see when it comes to burnout, are there certain ones that play a bigger role than others in contributing to burnout? So what our study showed was that there's 3 hazards that really jumps out as having the biggest impact on burnout. Those are job demand, job control, and workplace relationships. And so we define job demand as those unmanageable workload and or having too few resources to manage the workload. Job control, which is the lack of agency over how, where, or when the work is done, or perhaps insufficient involvement in decisions that happens at work. And that last piece there, workplace relationships, conflict or unhealthy relationships with supervisors or managers or co-workers. Now, that's one thing that kind of going back to Dr. Leader, that's a big piece that I know he talks about quite a lot, the importance of having those really strong team connections and team relationships, and how that it's a huge factor in alleviating against burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And when he was on our podcast a year or two ago, he talked about incivility and one of the interventions that they've crafted around how do you actually address incivility as obviously one of the root causes of burnout. But it's really validating to hear those results from your research, John, because that's definitely what we found in our own data, that the 2 things that are most predictive of burnout for us are work demands. So work overload in particular on our measure, and low job control. So they both account for over 25% of our overall model in predicting burnout when looking at multiple hazards. So it's important, right? And it's something you mentioned before, like some of the traditional ways that you either assess risk or you consult with staff. And I'm talking about things like employee engagement or culture surveys. They may not actually focus on the right things to understand the experience of burnout. So often in engagement surveys, they're looking at things like, leadership, they're looking at psychological safety as distinct from psychological health and safety. They're looking at, more cultural aspects. They're not necessarily looking at work demands. Maybe there might be 1 or 2 questions that look at work demands, but there's not a big focus on it. And the same with autonomy or decision-making latitude. There's usually not a huge focus on that. But if you really want to go beyond just understanding how attached are people to the organisation and how likely are you to retain them and move on to, well, what is the health impact of work, then you really need to, as you say, focus on work demands, low job control, and relationships.
I really think it's time to really reevaluate a lot of the engagement and culture surveys that organizations do. A lot of those sort of has been around for about 20 or so years. And I think how we view the relationship between organizations and its employees are quite a bit different. And also, the employees are a bit different today. A lot of those traditional engagement surveys are very much about the organization, how all of these different pieces relate to that organization, rather than having a sort of 2-way relationship on not just how individuals, the employees relate to the organization, but also how the organization affects individuals as well. And I think all those pieces about the psychological health and safety, all those things, there just need to be a sort of revision and kind of relook at are your current measures actually measuring and giving you a much more holistic view about things.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode. That's a really great nugget there, John. What you're saying there is basically, the surveys of the past, like employee engagement, culture surveys, is really about what do people feel about the organisation and the impact that they can have on the organisation. And we're looking at more productivity type metrics like job satisfaction and turnover and tension, that sort of thing, right? Whereas what you're saying is that we need to move to this, how does the organisation affect the employee? And that would be around things like burnout, obviously, and well-being. It goes both ways, right? But often where the organisation, or historically, organisations have been more important, like what can we get out of employees rather than what actually what's the harmful effects perhaps that we're having on our employees when they're at work, and how can we mitigate those?
I worked quite a few years in a large engagement consultancy that does the engagement type of surveys. And, I think what organizations were looking for is how do we get our people more engaged, because we know that the more engaged they are, the more productive they will be. So it's all about how does this benefit the organization, and all these things that we do for the individual is to benefit the organization. But we really need to sort of flip that a bit, exactly like you said. It needs to go both ways, and we need to understand how the organization is affecting individuals as well.
There you go, Joelle. 25 minutes in. That's your LinkedIn clip, I think. Let's
not just say that there's no point continuing the rest of the podcast. John might have some other gems.
I'm sure there's lots more gems, but I'm just saying that's really important, John, and that's something that I guess we've been trying to articulate ourselves. Going, well, when people say, "Can we just use our engagement survey as a psychosocial risk assessment?" We're like, "Oh, they're very different purposes. What you're trying to achieve out of those two consultation processes. Yes, it's a consultation, and yes, you might be able to use a survey, but the intent and what you want to get as an outcome is very different. So the methodology has to be different." So it's great to hear other people like yourself, John, who know quite a bit in this area, actually say a similar thing. It's not just us people.
It's always nice to have verification by an independent third party.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the big trends that we've seen over the past couple of years is this idea of the 4-day work week, or certainly just shortening the hours of work for people. Have you explored that in this year's research, and is there a relationship with burnout?
Yeah, this is all the rage and everything that we've been hearing quite a lot about, the 4-day work week or other forms of that reduced work time model. And especially, there's a lot of momentum here in Australia, in the UK, New Zealand, even in the US as well. And I actually think this is going to be one of the biggest workplace discussions in the next couple of years. I know there's a lot of unions taking this up, and I think it's WA Public Service that is looking to put that in as part of their contract as well. So this is going to be a really big kind of conversation. And so we want to try to get ahead of the game and try to get some data on what does that look like when it comes to, and the effects that it has on burnout. And so this year we partner with Work Time Reduction, which is a consultancy that helps organizations move into this reduced work time modality to do a direct comparison between those working a full-time 40 plus hours work week and those working in a sort of reduced time model, full time as well. So this can be, there's lots of different models out there. 4-day work week is probably the most commonly heard one, but there's a lot of 9-day fortnights or just half-day Fridays or any other type of model where they're working less than their normal 40-hour week for full pay. So we were able to kind of get two big populations and to do a direct comparison between these two populations. What we saw was a pretty resounding evidence on the benefits for those in the reduced work time model. Everything from well-being, engagement, retention, productivity, they were all much higher for those in this work model. And when it comes to burnout, a whopping 42% of people working over 40 hours indicated their burnout, while only 9% in this kind of model, in the reduced working model, were experiencing burnout. So very large kind of difference here. And these results on the surface, it seems like, it's a slam dunk. Let's all move into this model. But I think it actually opens up more questions for me personally than it does answer the questions. The question is about, like, is the reduced work time that's the cause for all of these positive effects that we're seeing? Or is it all of this organizational hygiene that these organizations do before moving to this reduced model that is actually creating positive effect? So most of these organizations, they go through about 12 to 18 months of work to do all of the cleaning up the organizational hygiene things, everything from how do you plan work, how do you reduce the number of meetings, and how do we reduce all of these unproductive things that they do? How do we change our culture? And even these very intentional effort to change people's relationship with work. That one I found really interesting. I heard all these anecdotal stories from a few organizations, like people when they first moved to a 4-day work week, they didn't know what to do with that day that they were off, and they would end up doing some work. Just like, oh, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or I'll try to get ahead for next week. Like we're so programmed to work 5 days, and that when we actually shift to a different model, there's a lot of things that we need to change within ourselves. So all of that really interesting kind of stuff. But what is it that is making these positive effects? Because I'm also really conscious that there's a lot of jobs out there that you can't easily move into a reduced work hour model with the same pay. Like hourly workers, those in front lines, and those roles are often occupied by women or other minority populations. So I know what we're doing in reduced work time, that's a really good kind of thing, but I want to make sure we're not also inadvertently creating a wider inequity in the workplace by solely focusing on just these roles that we can do the reduced work time on.
Yeah, spoken like a true org psych there, that, there's a correlation there. Why is that the correlation, and what could actually be happening there? I think lots of further research opportunities there to look at those organizational hygiene factors, as you say.
Yeah, not to get too nerdy, but I was going to do a structural occasional modeling to see which particular aspects of, I know like there's all of these different aspects that they change within an organization before they move into that. This might be good for whoever's listening, wants to do a thesis, do a structural occasional modeling on what are the actual factors that's leading to the positive effects.
Yeah, so I'm assuming you didn't collect any data regarding the hygiene factors that were changed, like, obviously reduced meeting times or reduced email usage or whatever?
Not this year. We're hoping to collect that next year if we continue down this road.
So if someone wanted to do a PhD, could you supply them data as well?
Yeah, let's talk.
Okay. Get in touch with John, people, if you want to do a PhD in this area. Hot topic. So another thing that we talked about, so that's related to work demands, I guess, and working hours specifically. Another thing you said was a big factor for predicting burnout was around relationships in the workplace. So incivility is a big one. But what about the opposite? What about loneliness? So when you don't have connections with fellow workers, Is there any relationship between loneliness and burnout?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Similar to burnout, loneliness has become a really fast-growing epidemic in recent years, especially after COVID. This was something that really got accentuated during this last few years. Research shows that loneliness is growing across all age group and demographics. Like traditionally, it occurred much more for sort of the older population, but now it's all across the group. Now, sort of that 18 to 24 cohort is, at least in the US, is the highest, has the highest level of loneliness, which is strange, being that they're probably also the most connected population out there. Now, the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he released an advisory last year calling for attention to this kind of what he's calling a public health crisis about loneliness, isolation, and sort of lack of connection in the US. And organizations here in Australia, like Ending Loneliness Together, they are also calling for more awareness in this underappreciated kind of health crisis. And actually, I mentioned COVID, but even before the onset of COVID, half of the US adults experience loneliness. And here in Australia, almost 1 in 3 always feel lonely, and 1 in 6 of us feel severely lonely. So, that 1 in 3, there's 3 of us here. So one of us is probably feeling lonely at the moment. And in our study,
John, are you okay? You're the only one sitting there on your own.
I know.
But Jason, you can be lonely whilst you're not alone. Let's not simplify things too much.
Sounds like
and you can be lonely in a big crowd. Anyway,
sorry, John.
Oh, that's right. I was going to tell this story about how the one time I felt really lonely was actually in the middle of Tokyo, surrounded by a million people. But anyway, we can talk about that later.
Well, you've told the story now, John.
The TLDR of the story.
So in this year's study, we wanted to kind of look into that to see if there is a relationship between burnout and loneliness. And what we found was pretty interesting. The data showed that there's a clear relationship between burnout and loneliness. So those who are experiencing burnout are twice as likely to experience loneliness. And that kind of makes sense. If you are burnt out, you are much more likely to experience loneliness. But interestingly, those who are experiencing loneliness did not have any increased likelihood of experiencing burnout. So that relationship only goes one way. And so this further supports that notion that burnout, it's not an individual thing. It is caused by organizational factors and what happens within those organizational settings that it's really burning out people. And the study also showed that those who are feeling lonely are less likely to be engaged. They reported being less productive and produce lower quality of work than those who were feeling lonely.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I found it, particularly interesting during COVID, right, when people went and worked remotely. At least in our data, we found that that there was less, obviously less bullying and harassment, less incivility because people could remove themselves from their colleagues a bit easier. And as a result, there's actually kind of better results in terms of people's psychosocial risk assessments. So people thought, COVID, that would be bad for people's mental health. But I think in some cases, if you're able to remove yourself from harmful relationships with colleagues, that would actually be better for your mental health due to work aspects. But then, you get one benefit, like I get away from all these bullies and people who are, kind of crap to deal with every day. But then you might become more isolated. And then that could have a detrimental effect on your well-being as well. So, kind of really interesting, all of these relationships. Put them chink, I guess, because I'm talking about relationships with relationships and how we experience other people or not experience them if you're lonely.
Yeah, we know from other research that this is something that we really need to look into because especially for the younger generation of workers, they do crave and they do crave some of this relationships within the workplace. For those of us who have been around for a while, we probably don't need that
we've had
nearly as
enough of
much.
we've had enough of
We have
people,
enough
John.
friends. We're good.
People suck.
Yeah. But for the younger generation, especially if you move into a new organization, you do need to build those relationships, and you gotta have a good mix between having some time together and be a lot more intentional about what we do to build those stronger connections with each other. It's not just come in every now and then, and when you come in, you're the only person there. It's got to be a lot more intentional.
So the other, I guess, the big piece of your state of workplace burnout report talks about the workplace sustainability model. So can you tell us a bit more or a bit about that model and the thinking behind it, please?
Yeah, as we were talking about citizen engagement and kind of cultural surveys, what's happened probably in the last 20 years or so is, whenever the engagement survey or cultural survey started, throughout the years, more and more things has been bolted on to it to cover all of these new topics as well. And what we think is employers need to think a little bit more holistically about how to address burnout, how to properly measure what's going on with their organization. And when it comes to burnout, there's still this big misperception out there that alleviating burnout is about fixing people, right? Like, what can we do to help fix our employees so that they don't burn out? Maybe we get them another app, some fruit, that to fix them right up. And instead of doing that, employers really need to change that focus from looking at individuals to looking at your structures and culture if they really want to make an impact on burnout. And so instead of thinking about the symptoms and how do we address those, looking at the root cause of the stress within the organization, like, is the work demands reasonable for one person to do? When was the last time any organization conducted job analysis or job designs? Does your culture reward these burnout behaviors? They're like, staying late, that's who gets rewarded. That's who gets the kudos for working through the weekend, things like that. Or there are even outdated processes or technology that's creating chronic stress for everybody. At the end of the day, I think we really need to talk about alleviating burnout not as a people initiative, or it's not something to address our people. It's really about operational excellence. It's making the organization a better place to work. And that's how we need to kind of change our thinking about that. And so based on our own and other recent workplace research, we released what we're calling the workplace sustainability model, which is intended to kind of spark a conversation about what's going on in the workplace. We believe that organizations can't thrive if it's not sustainable. So we're trying to create this baseline about every organization needs to be at least here before you think about, let's create like this really high performing, thriving, all of those things. That can't happen if it's not sustainable. So if you're burning out people, your organization can't be thriving. And so that's sort of the thesis behind this model. And we define workplace sustainability as a workplace where well-being and inclusion are embedded into the workforce, and the workplace. And so this is to ensure that there is a sustainable, productive, and engaged workforce. That's going to be really beneficial for not just the people, but for the organization and the wider ecosystem as a whole. And so there's five elements in our model: protection from harm, human leadership, people-centered structures, team connection, and personal growth. And by getting these elements right, organizations not only are able to kind of reduce their risk of burnout in their people, but they can also create a healthy, kind of productive culture that's going to be a real competitive advantage that other organizations won't be able to replicate easily.
Yeah, and so that's looking at, I guess, not just the let's not hurt people part of work, but also the let's not hurt people and let's also do things like have a more productive workforce and contribute to better outcomes for the business.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're still getting a lot of conversations with senior leaders like, oh, it's a nice to do. We do care about our people, and that's nice to do for them. And we really need to change, especially those of us in this area. Like, we got to change that conversation on, yeah, it's you want to take care of your people, but actually this is a real business priority for you. You won't be able to run your business properly if your people aren't well. And to change that conversation so that it elevates it to any other business priority.
Yeah, and it's certainly around like retention and attraction as well is a big part of that, right? Yeah.
No, we're as we grow out our teams, that's definitely something that we're trying to do, like practice what we preach and go, well, how do we design stuff that's good for people? So we're going back to good old job analysis and competency matrices and things like that. So it's good fun, and there's a lot of benefits, right? We're not just doing it so people don't burn out. We want to make sure that this is a great place that people want to come in and work every day.
We need to have another renaissance of job analysis. I think we've done that in like 20 years or 20 or 30 years.
Do you follow IO Psych memes?
Yeah. So good.
I love job analysis over there.
I am so jealous of how like clever, and I'm like, I wish I thought about that. I wish I was that funny about this topic. It's so good.
It is so good. So any psychologists who aren't following IO Psych memes on LinkedIn, get onto it. It's great. Yeah. So John, I can't remember how you answered this question last time, but it's a question we ask at the end of all of our podcasts. So what is your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
So I think my hopes is that, well, the world's becoming more stressful, and listening to podcasts about the U.S. politics does not help. Just so you know, so it's becoming much more stressful with all of the political, economic, environmental, social, all of those uncertainties that, for the most part, is out of our kind of direct control. And what I'm hoping is that we can really make the workplace a haven, right, and a driver of kind of positive mental health. Just within this world that we live in, that we don't have a lot of control in the workplace, we can actually have, especially for senior leaders, they have a lot of control in all the things that happen within this environment. So instead of the work being sort of a cause for chronic stress, it can become a place where people kind of feel engaged, they get that sense of accomplishment, they get recognized, they feel a sense of belonging, and then they can take that, or at least at the very least they leave no worse than they came in. And so it's just kind of imagine if people actually came to work where we spend a third of our or more of our day every day. Imagine if that was a really positive place where people got energized. What they would, when they stop working and they do things with their family, their friends, with societal things, what all of the great things that would happen because of that, and all of the benefits by fixing, not well just fixing, but really changing our concept of work from, again, like a place we just have to tolerate because we enjoy eating and everything, to something that is really positive for us. All of these other things that we have a little bit less control over, we'll have more headspace, we'll have more energy to be able to kind of take care of that.
Yeah, that's an amazing kind of vision of the future that you paint there. I love that idea of like how work can be a place that doesn't just like take from one's cup, but actually replenishes one's cup to give them more energy for things outside of work. So it's exciting.
And John, words of advice for listeners who are interested in working in the field of psych health and safety.
I would just say this field really makes a difference in the world, right? It might not seem like it sometimes, especially when you get into the minutiae of all of the detailed things that we do, but there's a real ripple effect in what you do, but with creating these really healthy and kind of safe workplaces, you're helping individuals and organizations have this really big impact that really ripples through both their personal and professional lives. Probably won't ever see it. Nobody's ever going to thank you for it. But you know that all of these great things that you are doing will have an impact. I know from firsthand experience, what happens when this kind of work doesn't get done. We lose people with really high potential. We lose really great people out there. And with the work that is done here, and the focus on this, we will keep those really great leads and good people, and hopefully they will go and fix the world.
Thank you, John. Excellent advice.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, John, like if you do this work, it can be really beneficial for other people, and a lot of people won't attribute that back to the work that you do as someone working in this space. Well, I think if we do evidence-based practice better, and we're like measuring at baseline, we're doing micro experiments, we then measure the benefits, and then we market those benefits back to leadership, back to the rest of the organisation, then the people working in this space should do a lot better job, I think, at like going, we did this and look what happened. So I think, yeah, and that's the beauty of the regulation. Some people say it's like, really onerous, but it's really just Org Psych 101, right? Like measure, do something, measure again.
That's right.
So let's hope as a profession we get better at demonstrating back to the organisation the positive benefits that we're having, both for well-being as well as productivity. But John, you don't disappoint. We'll definitely get you back next year, I think, to talk through the state of workplace burnout again when you do the next study. It's always fascinating having you on board, and thanks again for coming on and sharing your insights.
Oh, thanks so much. Really looking forward to it, and looking forward to seeing you guys at the conference.
Yep, looking forward to it, John. All right, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have these conversations with our guests, so feel free to go over to the FlourishDX YouTube channel to check that out. You'll also find we take the short snippets, like I mentioned, at the 25-minute mark, Joelle, today. I know there was other gold in there as well.
Oh, my goodness. All right, look, I'm writing down 25, good. Okay?
So we'll take those snippets and we put them on the FlourishDX LinkedIn page. So follow that page for those short snippets of gold from all of our guests. And while you're over there, connect with myself, Joelle, and John if you want to continue the conversation around workplace burnout. But that's it for today, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow FlourishDX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.